Welcome everyone to the Design Thinking Masterclass for the Innovation Festival. My name is Amy Ben. I am the Innovation Collab Lead at Innovate Durban. There's a lot that goes into my job. I'm not going to go into that. We've only got about an hour. But one of those things is being the Design Thinking Facilitator for Innovate Durban. So over the next hour or so, I am going to give you just a taster of what design thinking is, just to kind of pique your interest, get you excited about design thinking. I am, and Innovate Durban is very passionate about design thinking. So over the next hour, I'm going to run through what design thinking is like, what you can expect from it, a broad overview of design thinking. But we would love to host your organization, you and some friends, you and your startup, for a design thinking workshop. It's something that we do, both workshops, introduction workshops, and design thinking sprints. So we would love to have you over to the Collab Cafe for a good cup of coffee. But in the meantime, I'm going to share my screen and just kind of walk you through a broad overview of design thinking, give you some examples of design thinking, success stories. So essentially, welcome to Design Thinking 101. I've mentioned this already. The first thing you should know that, and like I said, this is a taster, is that we are looking at the very tip of a very big iceberg. It's not something that you'll get straight away. It's something you could do for years and years and years and years and kind of never see the whole iceberg. So just to forewarn you, I'm doing in an hour what you should normally do over 2, 3, 4 days. This is the iceberg. Let's just look at the tip of it for now. Another kind of example, maybe a lot of us haven't necessarily experienced an iceberg in real life, but potentially some of us are musicians or have tried to learn a musical instrument. An important thing to note is that learning design thinking, you can understand design thinking very quickly, but learning the real skills behind design thinking is similar to learning a musical instrument. You can understand the basics in one lesson. In an hour, you will understand the basics of design thinking. But, to be good at it, you're going to have to keep practicing. So in order to gain kind of true mastery and confidence in your design thinking process, it's a matter of practicing. Particularly the innovators who are watching this masterclass will probably have seen this slide before, be aware of this slide before, but it's very obvious to a lot of us that mature industries are under attack. Things like the taxi industry, things like the hotel industry, etc., things like movie houses, which used to be such a big, important part of our life, is shifting. Innovative, exciting companies are now owning huge parts of that industry, or have huge market share in that industry, through using things like design thinking. Airbnb, for example, and I'll talk about them quite a bit later, but they are one of the largest accommodation providers, or the largest accommodation provider in the world, and they don't own a single hotel. And Airbnb primarily used design thinking to do what they do today and do it so well. So before we get into design thinking, I think that's just one thing we need to consider. The benefits in using design thinking to make sure that you're the innovative organization or the innovative company who's able to then kind of set yourself apart from the other organizations. Another thing I want to look at is just differentiating innovation from invention. So I'll give quite an interesting example of that in a moment, but this is just a great sentence, and we'll break it down, you can see. But innovation is the creation of a new, viable business offering that solves a real problem. So the three important bits here is innovation and how it's different from invention. The fact that it's viable, it creates value for its customers and for the organization, and that it solves a real problem. So I don't know if any of you have gone on a Segway kind of trip around on the beachfront. It's a cool thing. They're lots of fun. I've been on them before, and they're a little bit scary the first time you go on them, but they're a lot of fun. You know, unless you were a cop in a mall, shopping center, and those are both just very Americanized words. Unless you were a security guard in a shopping center, it didn't change anything for you. It didn't solve any problems you had. So the niche here in terms of innovation is, it's something new, it's something exciting, but it solves a real life problem. We can come up with a million awesome ideas, and they're not going to have a lot of success if they're not solving a real problem for a real human being. So again, something I want us just to consider as we understand design thinking, and as we look at what it is, and what it does, and how it can change the world. Yeah. So what is design thinking? And we'll get there eventually, but this is just a place I like to start all my design thinking workshops with 3 of these questions. How many community centers are underutilized or vacant? How many employment schemes have resulted in real lasting jobs? And the last one, which I promise I'm going to spend too much time on, I'm probably going to irritate a couple of people with this, but how many pedestrian bridges actually get used? And I want us to think about those things, and community centers, good things. Employment schemes, good things. Pedestrian bridges, good things. They're all good things. Very often we see these brand new community centers built and they're empty, or they host a business forum once a month. We have employment schemes where people get jobs and it lasts for 6 months, but it never turns into a permanent job. We have pedestrian bridges. I obviously am from Durban. I used to live in Westville. I drove on the M13 a lot. And those of you who drive on the M13 will know there are a lot of pedestrian bridges going over the M13. I never see people use those bridges. I very often see people running straight across the freeway, risking their lives, risking my life, causing trouble, essentially. And the solution is there, theoretically. The bridge should be the solution to get over the freeway safely, but it doesn't get used. And if those tasked with getting pedestrians from one side of the highway to the other side of the highway employed some kind of design thinking, they may not be building bridges that don't get used. So that's just one kind of silly example, but it's something we'll come back to over and over. Going back to what is design thinking, in very simple words, design thinking is a mindset that helps us solve problems creatively. Very importantly, it has a human-centered core. So you might often hear it referred to as human-centered design. Those words or terms are used interchangeably. But really, it encourages organizations to focus on the people we're working for, or companies to focus on the people we're our customers, essentially. So it leads to us creating better products, better services, better internal processes. Really, when we sit down to create a solution for a business need, the first question we should always be asking is, what is the human need behind that business need? So really, when we use design thinking, we're pulling together what's desirable from a human point of view with what's technologically feasible and what's economically viable. So we'll get into the kind of broader layer of it. But why is design thinking important? I've only put 4 reasons. I could go on for a very long time about why I feel design thinking is important. But to sum them up, in four key points, it can help you or your team surface unmet needs of the people you're creating for. Often we're creating solutions that we assume people need, or that the people assume they need. So the process of design thinking can help us really kind of discover those unmet needs that maybe we didn't realize were there, and even the people we're creating for didn't know were there. It also reduces the risk associated with launching new ideas or launching old ideas. So the bridges, again, we spend millions of rands building these bridges that nobody uses. If we employ design thinking, it can help us reduce the risk, reduce wasteful expenditure, etc. It also generates solutions that can be revolutionary rather than just small incremental solutions. And it also helps us learn faster, which is ironic because design thinking is a long process. It can be a slow process. It takes time and effort to do and to use, but it'll help you learn faster once you use it well. So there are 3 pillars of design thinking that we'll look at, and then 5 stages. And you'll see these pillars pull through to the various stages. But these 3 pillars are empathy. Again, going back to the term human-centered design, empathy is the foundation of design thinking. The foundation in understanding the needs of the people we're designing for. Unless we are employing empathy, unless we're understanding the wants and the needs of the people we're designing for, we're not using design thinking. So that's just a core foundational element of design thinking. Then ideation is the second pillar. So ideation really is the core of creative activities in the design thinking process, and it's about coming up with a lot of ideas. Obviously, the main thing that we know as ideation is brainstorming. There's a host of different ways you can ideate. A lot of fun, weird, exciting ways to ideate, and we'll get into that in a bit later. And then the last pillar is experimentation. So, in this process, are our assumptions correct? Did we hit the right spot with our product? What are the users, thinking? How do they experience it? And we test out those ideas. We experiment through prototyping and through testing, and it's a lot of fun when we do it well. So those 3 pillars kind of feed through into the 5 different phases, and I've got this just brief slide and then 1 slide a bit later on. But the 5 phases of design thinking are empathizing or empathy, defining, ideation, prototyping, and testing. And in this slide and the next slide, they are shown in a linear kind of, this is where it starts, this is where it ends. It's never like that. Often, you'll reach the ideation phase and realize you haven't done enough empathizing, or you'll reach the test phase and need to re-prototype, for example. So although they're set out like this, they really shouldn't be, but it is what it is. This is just another kind of example of the same 5 stages. This is an image taken from the D School, which runs through the Institute of Design at Stanford University. So again, the empathy phase is about learning about our audience, understanding our customers, understanding the people we're creating for, understanding our clients, or our beneficiaries, just depending on who you are. Once we've done that, only then do we go on to the second phase, which is the defining phase, where we define the problem. We never start in the design thinking process with, this is the problem. We always say, before we decide, we think we know what the problem is. Let's understand the people. Second phase, we go on to define the problem. The next is around ideation. Like I mentioned, this is where we brainstorm. We come up with just utterly ridiculous, improbable, or impossible solutions. And we just have a lot of fun ideating. And then once we've gone through the ideation phase, we begin to prototype. We choose a couple of solutions or a couple of ideas, and we build a representation, whether it's out of cardboard and press stick, or whether it's something I just draw. We start creating prototypes, and then we take that prototype and we validate it. We take it to people who would use it, real life people, a couple of our actual customers, and they can play around with it, they can interact with it. And it tells us if we hit the mark. Very often, we don't hit the mark the first time, and we have to go back and re-prototype, or maybe we've missed the mark completely and we have to go back and define the problem again, or maybe go through the process of ideation. But very, very broadly, those are the 5 phases of design thinking. I'm going to break each of these down for us, so don't stress too much. But before we do that, a classic Albert Einstein quote, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution. Humans, we are wired to think about solutions. We see someone with a problem, we want to just solve it for them. And it's a good thing. It's a good kind of desire to have. But often we then offer solutions like bridges over freeways that doesn't really solve a problem for anyone, creates more problems potentially, and just doesn't really do what people need it to do. So yeah, the challenge with design thinking, or the challenge it gives us, it says to us, you know, you need to spend more time thinking about your problem before you try and solve that problem. This is another kind of image that we can use to understand those 5 phases of design thinking, or the process that it takes. And I quite like this one because it differentiates between what's abstract and what's real, and where we need to understand and where we need to make. So you can see there we start again, same place in the empathy phase, in order to understand the needs and the specific context we're designing in. And it's a real process we go through, and it's meant to help us understand. And then after that, we go then to that define phase, like I mentioned. And that's still about kind of understanding the issue, but it becomes more abstract. But really what we do there, and sometimes it might be called define, sometimes it might be called synthesize, but really that's about bringing down everything we've understood, all the data we've captured, into insights, into kind of valuable snippets of information that we can then say, okay, these 20 people said this similar thing, this similar thing, this similar thing, and we can start defining what the problem is. We then move on to the create kind of phase, where we start exploring options, possible solutions, which is again quite abstract, but we start kind of doing something more physical. And then we realize. So in this kind of diagram, they've squished prototyping and testing into one phase called the realize phase, which is around prototyping, testing, learning and understanding, and then refining or reiterating that prototype. So yeah, like I said, we first understand the why, and then we move on to the what. And you know, the what is in that creation element to that. So yeah, you can see here just quickly how that D-School image is broken down here into the different phases that I mentioned. All right, we are going to spend we've used about 15 minutes of our time. We're going to spend the next while just quickly going through each of those phases, and hopefully I don't run out of time, and we have some opportunity for any question and answers at the end. But like I said, the first phase is around empathy. Yeah, about understanding the needs and the contexts. It's a very real phase. There's a lot of ways to conduct your empathy phase of the exercise. And I've mentioned this before, but before I give you some examples, this is a quote by Henry Ford, who said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And this really is just to reiterate that idea that not only do we not necessarily understand what people want, but it's valid to say that they may not understand what they want. We live in, you know, our boxes, and if we aren't necessarily pushed outside that or shown kind of what's outside that, we'll think, you know, this is what I need. People couldn't imagine a car because they'd never been one before. So they would have said, you know, I want to go faster, I want to go get from A to B quicker, but all they could have pictured was a faster horse. So it's not to say that we shouldn't ask people what they want or what they need, but we need to work to sometimes help them realize things that they may not have realized themselves. And 2 just quick examples of this, or to kind of just delve into that a bit more in terms of the why and the how. The why is that if we don't do that, we start creating things like the Google Glass. I'm not sure how many of you remember that. It's a little bit of an old invention, I would say, not necessarily an innovation. It was a very cool technology. You had on this pair of for lack of a better word, or want of a better word, glasses, and you know, your messages would come up, you could check the weather, and you know, you would see it there. They absolutely flopped, because Google, who was designing these and inventing them, was bringing together very cool technology and theoretically a great idea, but no one wanted them, or maybe a couple of Silicon Valley tech guys wanted them because they thought they would be cool, but they weren't. And so the why of empathy is so we don't create things like unused pedestrian bridges or Google glasses that nobody wants, and we spend millions in development. And the how, which is where design thinking also is quite interesting because, I mean, I guess the old school word would be, term for it would be a bit touchy-feely. It's about understanding more than just what people say. So it's understanding the person and the context as a whole, holistically. It's about what people say, yes, but it's also about what they're doing when they're saying that. It's about how they feel and it's about what they think. And if we aren't considering each of these things, we're not conducting this phase of design thinking adequately. So the one thing we do while we're doing this this first phase is called empathy mapping. So whoever we're conducting our research with, whoever we've identified as our users or our customers, we create a map for that person. Who they are is important, and then what they say, what they think, what they do, and what they feel is just a really important thing to delve into as we begin our first phase of design thinking. There's a lot of other ways to do it. This again is just a very short list. I've got an hour to do this, but some of the ways we can understand our users, we can conduct research surveys. Super simple. You can do a Google form, get it out to 100 people and kind of get that research done as quickly as possible. We can do things like observation, where we just, it's as dumb as it sounds, we observe. So we can just sit if we're designing something for a new restaurant, we can sit in the restaurant and just watch who does what, where people are going, how they're interacting with whom, etc. We can interview specific users, which I mean, a lot of us would have done in the past for Varsity. We can interview experts on the subject matter. We can do things like immersion, where we interact as if we are one of the users and we immerse ourselves in that situation. Things like analogous inspiration, extremes and mainstreams. I'm not going to go into those two because, like I said, I've got an hour, not a day. But there are so many cool ways to do this first phase of design thinking. And like I said right at the beginning, this is to just pique your interest. The intro to innovation, intro to design thinking workshop, we delve into these and we do physical exercises where we take each person through this whole process in a very practical way. So once you've done that first phase, once you've empathized, once you've really properly understood your user and their context and who they are, what they want, what they need, we begin that define or synthesize phase. We start creating insights, really understanding what are the key important bits of information. Often during empathy, the empathy phase, you'll get a lot of information and it all has value, but it's not necessarily all super important, and it's valuable to then bring that down to kind of key bits of information so that you can start really understanding what the problem is. So we move on to that define phase. We start synthesizing our findings into what we call insights. It can all be quite tricky. For me, I found that this phase can be the most difficult. It's also because it's such an important phase within the process, to accurately define the problem, then obviously, but it impacts the rest of the process of design thinking. And if we haven't done it right, we might be heading that direction when we should have been going that direction. It's a really important phase. There's a couple of steps here. We download our learnings. So, we might have chosen to do a couple of different empathy exercises, we might have done research surveys, we might have done an immersion exercise, and we might have done some interviews. And if there were a bunch of us doing that, we all would have a bunch of learnings that we need to then bring together. So sometimes you can grab your post-it notes and, Koki, and you just write down, things you learned about the person, what they said, what they felt, what they did, and then you put those up so that you can see them all clearly. Once you've got that, then you can start finding themes and insights. Like I said, you might have interviewed 20 people and 15 of them said very similar stuff. You can start seeing, if a lot of people are saying the same thing, there's a theme there, there's maybe an insight there. And then you kind of craft your problem statement. And very often within the design thinking process, our problem statement comes out as a how might we question, and we'll get into that a bit later. The important thing here is about framing the problem correctly. So a problem statement identifies the gap between our current state, in other words, the problem, and what our desired state is, where we want to be, either of your process or your product. And within the design thinking context, you can think of the user problem as an unmet need, especially if you're innovating. What is an unmet need of my community or of Durban or of South Africa, etc. And so by designing a solution that meets this need, you can satisfy the user and you enable a pleasant user experience. So the important thing here when we're defining our problem is to focus on our user specifically, because we are solving the problem for them. If they aren't the focus, we aren't solving their problem, and then we're going to have a problem. The other thing is to keep it broad. If we get very specific very early on, our solution options are very, very limited, so we keep it as broad as possible so that we can bring as many solutions as possible forward. And then the other thing is to make it manageable. We can't solve problems. We can't solve every problem as much as we want to. We need to have a defining. Need to have a problem statement, or the synthesizes all down to something that we can solve realistically. It's great to dream big dreams, but if it's not manageable, we start limiting ourselves from the get-go. So yeah, this is just a kind of a nice template you can use. Like I said, there needs to be a user, there need to be the focus, there needs to be a need. Again, if we don't have the user and if we don't have the need, what are we doing? We're creating segues. And then there needs to be some kind of insight, some kind of friction, some kind of realization, some anomaly. And I'm going to give you guys a couple of examples. Like I said, I found this the hardest part of design thinking. I think it comes naturally to some people, but some of these examples may help each of you. Another thing just to look at very briefly before we go into that is the 4 W's, the who, the what, the where, and the why. Again, who's experiencing the problem? What is the problem? Where does the problem present itself? And why does it matter? Why is it important to solve that problem? I'm skipping ahead a bit just because we only have so much time. And so in all of this, in understanding in having conducted your empathy kind of phase, having downloaded your learnings, having found your themes or your insights, we start creating those how might we questions, our problem statements. And really that how might we is an understanding that every problem is an opportunity to or for design. And so we frame this in the how might we. And the how might we, if we break it down into the how, the might, and the we, the how means that we're coming up, with an answer, with a physical representation, something real. The might is acknowledging that this may not work. We might solve it this way. We may not, but we might. And so that just also keeps it broad and opens it up to us to say, you know, if we fail, it's okay this time round. It's just a might. And the we is important because it's not I. It's not how might I solve this problem. In order to solve problems well, we need to have people from different backgrounds, you know, so that we are bringing as much insight and as much, you know, throwing as much as we can at the problem. So just quickly looking at a couple of examples, broken down into that template, the user, the need, and the insight. And so the user here was kids with cancer. The need was for them to play and have fun and just feel like a normal kid. And the insight that was gained when they spoke to these kids, when they, you know, observed them and just really empathized with them, was that kids participate in anything once they perceive it as an adventure. So the how might we, the problem statement that they were able to craft from that was, how might we turn MRI scans for children into an adventure? It's a simple question, but it's broad. There's so many ways you can answer that question. You can see by the image how they answer that question, but essentially it just meant that when we got to the ideation phase with this how might we, there were so many options to answer this, so many ways to answer it, that it must have made for a really cool design thinking process. Another how might we looks at how might we create a non-electrical infant incubator that keeps babies close to a mother's body. So the user here was young moms in poor rural areas in developing countries. The need was for these moms to always carry their baby close to their body, because in their context, that equals being a good mother. And the very specific insight here was that there's low cultural acceptance in many of those countries to leave babies alone in an incubator, for example, even though obviously keeping them in an incubator was good for them. And so again, you can see how they've solved this problem quite impressively, actually. And then the next one is around designing solar charged hearing aids for kids in India. I'm not going to go into all of them, cognizant of our time. But yeah, so again, one of the things that we can do there is called brainstorming. And I am just going to pause this. And so the next phase that we get to, once we have empathized and once we have synthesized or defined our problem and come up with our how might we question, is ideation. We spoke a bit about this. Ideation is just about coming up with epic ideas. There's a lot of ways to do that. I'm going to give you guys some examples. But primarily, kind of an important thing to know is that the ideation process is kind of split into two main sections: divergent thinking and convergent thinking. And divergent thinking, obviously, you know, you diverge from your how might we. So you have your how might we statement, and then you just start just thinking about awesome ideas. Again, a lot of different ways to do that. I'm going to go into that now. And once you've come up with your very large amount of ideas, you then start to converge again. You know, you can't prototype 100 different solutions, or I mean you could, but it wouldn't be feasible. And then you start converging back down, and you choose your 2 or 3 or 4 kind of ideas that you want to then prototype and develop. So yeah, some kind of examples of ideation we'll get to, but again, you can see where we've kind of come to on our diagram in terms of those 5 design thinking processes. Ideation falls into that create block, where we start exploring options and possible solutions. Important to note that ideation is about shared invention. Attaching a single person to a single idea hinders collaboration and greatness. I think a lot of people want to be the person who came up with the great solution, and you know, every now and again you do get one individual who came up with one awesome idea, and change the world with it. But very often meaningful change and meaningful innovation and impact happens when teams are working together, when teams are collaborating together. So when we talk about design thinking process, is particularly around ideation, it's about doing things together and sharing kind of that process. Another thing to consider here, you know, once we've looked at ideation, and I've probably skipped a little bit forward. I should have before I showed you the slide, but it's up now. Is just to talk about, you know, the different ways to ideate. I mentioned brainstorming earlier. My personal favorite is called the worst idea ever. And you know, you have your problem. To bring it back to the bridge, how do we get people safely from this side to that side of the bridge, or that side of the highway? You know, worst idea ever. We could train lions to carry people on saddles on their backs from this point to that point. It's a really bad idea, but that's the point of the worst idea ever. You just put out your worst ideas, and either it sparks good ideas or it just shows you what you definitely shouldn't do. But the ideation phase of design thinking is about having fun. You know, either you know, you've got 20 minutes to come up with 100 ideas, or you start putting constraints on yourself. This can only take an hour to build, or it has to fit in, you know, a 5 square meter box, or it can only cost 100,000 rand, or it has to cost over 1 million rand. And you can start doing these things and having fun with that. And once you've come up with the ideas, once you've said, okay, these are the 40 ideas we've come up with to solve our innovation, you've done your divergent thinking, you now need to start converging. And so the way to do this is to put every solution you've come up with through an innovation filter. And it's a super simple thing. It's looking at, and I've mentioned this earlier as well, it's looking at what's desirable, what's viable, and what's feasible. And so really what's feasible looks at technology. Does the technology exist to make this thing real? There's, again, no point coming up with awesome ideas if the technology is not there. Maybe in 20 years you could do it, but you can't do it now. Whatever's not feasible, you chuck it out. You look at what's viable, and that's particularly what's viable from a business perspective. Very simply, can I make money from doing this? And more broadly, you know, is it distinctive in this market? Do I need to get a license to do that here? You know, can I sustain the growth for this solution in this market? And then the third one is it desirable? Do people actually want it? Is it actually solving a real problem for them? You know, it may be technologically feasible. The technology exists. You can do it cheaply. You can make a profit. But, you know, there's 10 people in the country who actually want this. No one really desires it. And so you may fit 2 of these and miss one. And if you do, it's not going to work. So you use your innovation filter to start kicking your ideas out and converging down to, you know, what you're going to use or what solution you're going to take forward and prototype with. So yeah, talking about prototyping is your next phase. So prototyping, particularly, I mean, working in an innovation lab, we've got cool machinery, we've got 3D printers, we've got large format printers, there's exciting machinery, and often when people talk about prototype, they're thinking about a high-tech thing, whatever it may be. Design thinking, for those of you who have been at a workshop, you know there's a lot of post-it notes, stickers, cardboard, press stick, those little fluffy wire cleaner things, I can't even remember what they're called, that your kid uses for their art at daycare. And so the idea behind prototyping is not to spend money. It's about just making an example or a physical representation of your idea that people can interact with. And I've got 1 or 2 cool examples of that, but we'll get into that in a bit. Just to reiterate that, the prototyping phase, we start looking at that realize kind of portion of this diagram, where we start prototyping and then testing what we've created. So you can see here where we're at the make phase. To note here is that a good solution is only effective if it's reaching the people it intends to serve. Again, bringing it all the way back to the fact that design thinking is about solving real problems for real people, and meeting our users where they are. So it's only going to be a good solution if it's actually going to be a solution for those people that we were creating for. So in terms of what is prototyping, so I've said this already, but it's about bringing your ideas, the ideas that are in the cloud or your cloud, come to life. So out of your head and into the hands of the people you're designing for, so that you can learn quickly. We can iterate, so we can realize, what, this didn't really work, people didn't like this, we can change it. And it also helps our idea evolve. The ideation phase, yes, we come up with a bunch of different ideas and they're great, but that doesn't mean that is the solution. Prototyping says, let's bring this out, let's test it, because your ideation phase, you're never going to come up with the immediate solution to your problem, because yes, you've done the empathy, but you haven't tested that problem or that solution with anybody. Why it's important. Again, people often, in fact, will potentially even do the empathy phase, go through the define phase, ideate, and then think, okay, I'm done. That's my solution, let's build it. And often people have done that. I've seen it happen. And you can spend 10,000, 100,000, 100 million Rand, then creating this ideation or this idea that you come up with the solution. But you miss the prototyping, you miss the testing phase, and you, again, to bring it back to the bridges, you'll end up building bridges that nobody uses. So it's important because it lets you understand what the user doesn't like, what they do like. So this image is just one small example of a design thinking process that happened in a low-income community in Mexico. And they were busy trying to solve kind of a banking or ATM issue. And instead of creating the bank or the ATM and spending all this money, they built a mock ATM out of cardboard and created a credit card out of paper. But you can see here that they are able to test it, they're able to interact, they can help the user, or get the user to help them understand what they did wrong, what they did right. And it's a really important phase that often gets kind of, we come up with a solution and we want to implement before we do this. So just very quickly, there's a couple of different types of prototyping. I'm not going to spend too much time on each of them. We get physical prototypes, service prototypes, digital prototypes, and environmental prototypes. And again, the thing here is that you may, see a digital prototype and think, okay, I need to start coding and developing my app. It's not always like that. There's a great example of an organizational company that was pitching for Elmo app for Sesame Street, and they had spent time and money doing exactly that, coding, developing an app, and about an hour or so before they were meant to go and pitch, the app crashed, and they couldn't get it online. And they got some cardboard, cut out a phone, and they landed up acting out the interaction with that app, put someone behind behind the screen, and they enacted what the app would do, and they were, they delivered a successful pitch. So often we see, or we see our idea that we've come up through the ideation phase, and we think this is the way we need to prototype it. We need to spend money, have an impressive prototype. When we talk about prototyping and design thinking, it's about creating things like you see in this image out of cardboard and Play-Doh, and not spending the money, because the idea is you're going to iterate, you're going to change it around. You're going to say, you know what, this didn't work. How do I replace it quickly with what I have on hand? The beauty of this whole process of design thinking is it is low tech. You can do it in the middle of nowhere, you know, with people who don't understand coding and the fourth industrial revolution or things like that, but understand their context and their community and their needs really well. So that's just a really cool thing that I love about design thinking. I'm not going to give you too many examples of all the different prototypes, but these are kind of the four main areas they fit into. There's a lot of research about it, and again, when we do this this workshop with organizations, we go through this and we solve real problems, and so we go through a prototyping phase. We play a couple of prototyping games. It's a lot of fun. Sorry, before I actually go onto the design thinking success stories, what I should reiterate, and I don't have any slides for it, but the next phase here is the testing phase. And obviously you're testing the prototype you've developed. So you then go, and it's no use testing that, you know, with your colleagues or within the group that you've designed it with. You then go find a focus group or find a couple of your potential users, and you say to them, you know what, this is what we're doing. Don't give them the whole context. But would you, you know, test my prototype for me? Would you give me some insight? And like I mentioned right early on in the beginning, yes, those diagrams started at empathy and ended with test. It's not like that. You know, it's often circular. You may, you know, get to the testing phase and have to go back and reiterate your prototype, or you might get to the testing phase and people are like, what, you know, what is this even? And realize you got your problem statement completely wrong, your how might we question, and have to go back there, or realize you kind of, you know, skipped over the empathy phase, didn't do that well. So yes, after prototyping, we go on to the testing phase. But you know, you may have a bit of back and forth and in between and back and front, so whatever, to go over once you've got to the testing phase. I promised you in the beginning that I'd give you some success stories around design thinking. I already mentioned Airbnb. I stole my own thunder a little bit, but Airbnb, you know, was operating for a while, not making any profit really. They were making about $200 a week, and they knew, you know, something had to change drastically if they were going to find success, and so they did just that. They went through a design thinking process. You know, they realized they had a problem. They knew they needed to do something revolutionary to solve it. And we all know Airbnb now. I think it's safe to say the majority of us have stayed in the Airbnb, and they have huge success now through implementing the design thinking process. Another success story is an example that comes out of Stanford as well, but about redesigning the emergency room at the Stanford Hospital. I'm not sure how many of you have been into an emergency room. I've taken people into an emergency room. Luckily, I've never been a patient. They're not nice places to be. There's a lot of trauma, yeah, a lot of heartache, and having a space that that makes you feel better about being there is important. And so the D School in Stanford worked with the hospital, and they did kind of an immersive study of the emergency room, and they actually went through a process of redesigning the space and making it a place that not necessarily people wanted to be in, but that kind of you know, didn't compound on that trauma of having to go to the emergency room. This is a very cool example from Africa. It's an organization or company called Clean Team, who were developing a new type of toilet and sanitation system, and also found huge success, went through a design thinking process, and developed an incredibly innovative product and service offering. Yeah, and it's kind of revolutionizing the sanitation game in Africa. So definitely check them out on a side note. And then another design thinking success story is around a small municipality in Denmark, whose name, if I try and pronounce it, I'm sure I will get wrong. But their elderly population was really struggling, and they were providing meals to them, and they just had a very depressed kind of elderly population. They weren't looking after themselves, caring for themselves very well. And they underwent a design thinking process, the municipality, to kind of tackle this issue, to really understand what was behind the problem for the elderly folk. Instead of just saying, you know, let's just solve it this way, let's just do that. Yeah, they kind of went through a very important and kind of valuable design thinking process, and they designed a solution that looked at kind of delivering higher quality meals in person to the elderly population in the municipality. And the health benefits, the wellness benefits that they saw for these older folk was huge, and it was a great success story for their municipality and for their community. You know, that's one of a lot of different examples I could have given you. I know I have not rushed through this, but I've had to do what I would, like I said, normally do in 2.5 days in a much shorter period. Hopefully you have gleaned something from that. I said it earlier, I am so passionate about what design thinking can do, the benefits it can have for your organization, but for the world, not to be too dramatic about it. Design thinking really can change the world if we use it well. And so I would encourage everyone, first of all, to ask questions. We are here to answer the questions both on the Innovation Festival platform, as well as at the Innovation Collab. Karen is going to laugh at me because I do always invite people to have coffee at the Collab, but for real, come and have a coffee at the Collab. If you don't like coffee, we've got tea, we've got hot chocolate, and it's a cool space. You can come and use our internet and learn a bit more about us in general and design thinking in particular. But yeah, this was to pique your interest, get you excited about the possibilities of design thinking. I mentioned it already, we do these workshops for organizations. If you are interested, you can visit our website to see more about it, or you can email any one of us. My email address is Amy, A-M-Y, @innovate.durban. Super simple. We would absolutely love to hear from you. We are going to link a couple of resources so that you know, while we wait for you to email us, while we wait for you to visit us for a cup of coffee, you can do a bit of reading, check out a couple of cool resources around design thinking. But yeah, that's me. Thank you so much for having me, for joining us on our masterclass. We hope that you learned something, and we do hope to hear from you soon. Cheers.